Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take really complex source material, often dense stuff, and, well, try to distill it into something genuinely insightful for you.
Yeah, make it make sense.
Exactly. And today we are wrestling with a huge question, one that really sits at the foundation of, well, theological thinking, but also legal accountability. It's this. When something goes wrong, a transgression happens. Who ultimately pays the price? And maybe more importantly, what exactly are they paying for?
It's fundamental, isn't it? And the sources we're looking at today, they're not really interested in the quick surface level answer you might expect.
No, not at all. Instead, what we've got is this really deep, I don't want to say revolutionary interpretation of accountability.
Right.
It draws heavily on an ancient Jewish ritual, the Day of Atonement.
Right, Leviticus, that whole ceremony.
So our mission for you listening, and frankly for us trying to explain it, is to pull out the core insights from this analysis, because it seems to fundamentally shift the focus. It moves away from the action of sin, the transgression itself.
And puts it squarely onto the cause of the sin, which, according to this material, is the original lie.
It's a complete shift in thinking, almost a paradigm shift, like you said before we started. And it means we have to kind of abandon our usual assumptions about simple substitution, just swapping one penalty for another.
We really do, because when most people think about this, they immediately picture that very vivid scene from Leviticus 16, the high priest.
Laying hands on the goat.
Yes, exactly. Laying his hands on the head of the Azazel goat, the scapegoat. And it looks like he's transferring the sins of Israel onto it before sending it away, out into the wilderness.
And on the surface, that seems pretty straightforward, almost like a legal transaction. The goat takes the burden, the community gets symbolically cleaned up. Simple.
Seems simple.
Yeah.
But our source material just completely challenges the, let's call it, mechanical understanding of the transfer. It argues pretty forcefully that the high priest isn't transferring the physical act, the transgression, or even the record of the action itself.
Okay, hold on. If Christ has already dealt with the actual sin, the action, the breaking of the law, then what's left?
Yeah.
What is this central kind of non-intuitive idea our source material is demanding we grasp about this whole Azazel ritual?
The core idea, the really big takeaway, is that the responsibility being transferred back to the source.
Yeah.
It isn't the physical transgression that's recorded, it's the falsehood. It's the lie that acted as the catalyst, the thing that sparked the transgression in the first place.
The lie, not the act.
Exactly. And that distinction is just crucial because, as the source keeps reminding us, the actual sin of the believer, the debt racked up by the action of breaking the law that's already settled.
Paid for.
Yeah. Scripture references like Isaiah 53.4, for instance, seem to confirm this. Christ has already borne the transgression itself. He took the hit for the action.
Okay, wow. That really does change everything. If the sin itself is paid for by Christ's substitution, then what is this incredibly dramatic ritual with the Azazel goat actually symbolizing? It can't just be about the symptom anymore.
No, it has to be targeting the root problem, right? Not just sweeping the mess under the rug. The source is basically arguing that the entire point of the ritual is to identify, isolate, and send back the source of the rot in creation.
The source of the rot.
Yeah.
The lie.
Exactly. So if you think of sin as the symptom, then the lie is the underlying disease that allowed it to happen. And this need to trace the disease back to its origin, well, it immediately brings up a really critical legal hierarchy we have to understand.
Which is?
The principal offender versus the accomplice. I mean, think about any legal case involving fraud or maybe coercion. You always have to distinguish, don't you, between the person who came up with the scheme, the originator,
and the person who actually carried out the flawed action, maybe because they were tricked or misled.
Precisely. The originator and the one who acted on the deception.
Okay, let's define those roles very clearly then, based on the framework we're getting from our source material. Who is the principal offender here? Who holds the primary responsibility for, creating and introducing this fundamental falsehood into the whole system?
According to this analysis, that role belongs squarely, without any question, to Satan. He's identified as the principal offender, the original source of the deceit.
The father of lies.
That's the biblical language, yeah. The source points right to passages like John 8.44. Christ identifies him as a murderer from the beginning, and crucially, a liar. It specifically notes that when he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, because he is a liar and, yes, the father of lies.
And this establishes that key moment back in Genesis.
Genesis 3.4, yes, where he casts the lie. It's not just tempting, it's fundamentally introducing a falsehood that warps the perception of reality itself. That's the act of the principal offender.
Okay, so if Satan is the principal, the originator of this fraudulent scheme,
Yeah.
where does that leave Adam? And I guess, by extension, all of humanity who sort of inherited that flawed legal standing.
Well, they are the accomplice. Humanity is definitely undeniably guilty of the transgression, the action of disobeying a known law. That's clear. But, and this is the key, their action was carried out under the powerful influence of a fundamental falsehood.
So, misled participants.
You could put it that way. Misled participants, yes. But here's the critical point, and it bears repeating. The principal offender, Satan, cannot bear the accomplice's guilt for the action.
Right. That's a really deep legal principle, isn't it? You can't just transfer the specific record of human guilt, our actions, what we did, onto Satan. Why is that rule so absolute in this theological framework?
Well, think about the principle of substitution. It requires someone innocent to pay the price for the actions of the guilty. Satan is the original criminal here. His very nature is defined by malice, lying, murder. He's already guilty.
He can't pay off someone else's debt if he can't even pay his own.
Exactly. He has his own massive debt. So if the accomplice, humanity, is seeking redemption for their actions, only someone completely innocent, the last Adam, Christ, can actually satisfy the wage of that sin, the death penalty for their transgression. Satan simply isn't qualified.
Right, okay, that makes sense. So the Azazel ritual cannot possibly be about transferring the sin itself, the action.
Yeah.
It absolutely has to be about completing the legal record by assigning the responsibility, the culpability for the cause.
Yes. Assigning culpability for the origin of the problem.
So then what precisely is returned to Satan through that symbolic scapegoat? If not the action, then what?
What's returned is the falsehood, the lie he spread to the accomplice. And this wasn't just, a minor error or a little white lie. It was a falsehood that caused humanity to fundamentally misunderstand the very nature of God, the nature of his law, and even the nature of their own purpose.
The complete distortion.
A complete distortion. And it's this fundamental misunderstanding that makes them prone to transgression in the first place. It sets them up to fail.
So that reframes the entire fall, doesn't it? The original sin wasn't just a simple act of disobedience. The core cause was this profound, externally sparked intellectual and spiritual misunderstanding of who God is and what he intended.
Absolutely. The source really hammers this point home. Misunderstanding God is the root that inevitably leads to sin. If you operate under a warped, false view of the Creator, if you think he's restrictive or unfair or withholding good things,
then disobedience starts to look reasonable or even necessary.
Exactly. It leads directly to disobedience. But conversely, the source argues truly knowing God prevents this misunderstanding. It leads naturally to love and then to adherence to the law. This is the deep implication of knowing God, the kind talked about in places like Jeremiah 9.24 or 1 John 5.20.
So the returning of the lie via the goat. It's like the repentant human saying, I reject that false picture. I reject that misunderstanding. I'm restoring my true knowledge of God.
Yes, it becomes this intensely personal, intellectual, and spiritual declaration. I'm sending back the bad information you gave me. It's not just some bureaucratic shuffling of charges on a cosmic spreadsheet.
Wow, okay. And that intellectual battle, that rejection of the false picture, leads us straight into the heart of Satan's motivation, doesn't it? Because the source material suggests he wasn't just aiming for Adam and Eve to, take a bite of fruit.
Oh, definitely not. That was just the opening move. He was using that moment to lay out a comprehensive legal case against God's entire system of governance, against his sovereignty.
A cosmic lawsuit, essentially. Okay, let's dig into that case. What were the specific lies told in Eden? And how did they function as, the first shots fired in this bigger challenge to God's right to rule?
Well, the lies were incredibly calculated. They were designed specifically to attack God's character. In Genesis 3, verses 4 and 5, Satan hits Eve and through her Adam with two core falsehoods.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, the lie about consequences, basically immortality, you will certainly not die. This directly contradicts God. It suggests God is lying about the penalty for disobedience, trying to scare them, making him fundamentally untrustworthy.
Undermining his word. And the second lie.
The second is the lie about potential, about divinity. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. This suggests God is deliberately withholding something really good, something essential from his creature's enlightenment, maybe self-determination, power.
So God looks like he's being restrictive, maybe even jealous, keeping them down.
Exactly. That's the implication. So the temptation wasn't just about eating a piece of fruit. It was an invitation to believe that self-elevation, achieved through disobeying God, would lead to some greater unrestricted state of being that God was unfairly preventing them from reaching.
A shortcut to godhood, bypassing the Creator.
That was the pitch. But the reality, as we know, was catastrophic, an immediate, devastating failure. Adam and Eve did not become gods. They just suddenly recognized their nakedness. They realized they were transgressors. They knew they'd broken the rule.
And that realization didn't lead to freedom.
It led to the exact opposite, utter bondage. They became slaves to sin, slaves to Satan in a sense, and fundamentally subject to death. Hebrews 2.14, John 8.34, these passages confirm it. The pursuit of freedom through disobedience resulted in the deepest possible form of slavery.
So this goes way beyond just breaking a rule in a garden. Satan used this localized event to launch a full-scale legal and, well, existential attack against the Creator of everything.
That's the picture the source paints.
And our source material actually details 5 specific, pretty severe claims that make up Satan's broader challenge against God's law and his very right to rule. Let's really unpack these because they seem to form the backbone of the lie that ultimately has to be returned.
Yeah, these 5 claims are basically Satan's legal brief, you could say, presented in the cosmic court, all designed to prove God is tyrannical and fundamentally unjust.
Okay, let's start with the first one, the one about restriction.
Claim number 1 is essentially restriction of freedom and goodness. Satan argues that God is deliberately holding his creatures back, preventing them from becoming truly free or wise or attaining what he calls essential good things.
Making God look like a jealous dictator.
Pretty much. Implying God is insecure, maybe, and arbitrarily withholds happiness and potential from his subjects. This connects right back to Eden, the idea that God's restrictions aren't for their good, but for his control.
Okay. And the second claim goes right for the heart of God's core command, doesn't it? The law of love.
Yes. Claim 2. The law itself is flawed and impossible. Satan argues that the foundational law, the command to love God fully and love your neighbor as yourself, is simply too demanding. It's utterly impossible for creatures like us to actually keep, and therefore the law itself is fundamentally flawed.
Because if a king sets a standard, nobody can possibly meet.
Then that king is unjust by definition. That's the argument. It's a setup for failure.
Which leads logically to the third claim, which must attack the idea of sacrifice for that law.
Exactly. Claim 3. Self-sacrifice is wrong. He challenges the very notion that anyone should sacrifice their own desires, maybe even their life, for the sake of upholding this supposedly impossible law. Satan promotes radical self-interest. If the law demands suffering or death, he argues, it must be wrong, which just further proves God's system is fatally flawed.
Why die for a bad law?
That's the gist. Then the fourth claim gets even more dramatic. It essentially paints God not just as unjust, but as a kind of cosmic killer.
How so?
Claim 4. The law is actually a murder weapon. Satan pushes it further, claiming the law isn't just flawed, it's actively hostile. It's a murder weapon deliberately designed to trip creatures up, to make them fail, and ultimately to kill them, giving God an excuse for destruction.
Wow. That's a severe indictment. God using his own rules for, systemic
It's a
execution.
very dark picture. And then comes the fifth claim, the political climax, you might say, of his whole argument.
The conclusion of his case.
Yes. Claim 5. God is unjust and must be dethroned. This pulls it all together. If the law is impossible to keep, if it's really a murder weapon, and if God insists on enforcing it anyway, then God is fundamentally unjust. Therefore, the conclusion is God must step down from the throne.
And presumably, let Satan take over.
That's the implication. Satan argues he should govern the created order instead, probably under some system promising unrestrained freedom and self-determination, the very things he falsely offered in Eden.
Okay, that is a much more sophisticated systemic argument for rebellion than just eat the apple. It's a calculated attempt to portray the Creator as a tyrant, motivated by insecurity, maybe even bloodlust. A terrifying picture.
Complete inversion of God's character.
But the source immediately counters this, right? It offers the divine defense, defining the law against these severe accusations. How does it do that?
It's very careful in defending the law. It clarifies that the law is absolutely not burdensome. It's not some distant alien set of rules. It's accessible, it's visible, it's almost intrinsic to the creature's very being.
Close by.
Very close. Deuteronomy 30.11 is a key text here. It is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it. And Romans 13.8, about love being the fulfillment of the law, reinforces this. The law isn't external rules, it's the immediate, visible expression of God's own love and justice in action.
So it's like the operational manual for the universe showing how love and justice actually work. To say the law is impossible is basically saying love itself is impossible or justice is impossible.
Which is the foundational lie. Exactly. The source really emphasizes this. The law is not a flaw in creation. If Satan's central claim that the law is impossible were actually true, then yeah, God's whole claim to be loving and just would be false. Satan would have a legitimate case.
But he doesn't.
He doesn't. Because Christ's perfect fulfillment of the law and then later the obedience of the martyrs, even under extreme pressure, ultimately proves Satan is the liar. It confirms the law's truthfulness, its goodness, its perfection, even when tested to the absolute limit.
Okay, so we've got the principal offender, Satan, and the accomplice, Adam and humanity. We've got the cause of the crime, that detailed multi-part lie attacking God's character and law. Now we need to tackle the mechanism more closely. If Adam was tricked by this really elaborate, malicious lie, why is he still accountable? Why isn't he just an innocent victim of cosmic fraud? Why only an accomplice?
Ah, right. This brings us to that crucial internal element, the part that makes humanity complicit even when they've been deceived. And this element, according to the source, is human selfish desire. It's often translated powerfully in this context as lust or maybe ambition or just plain selfishness.
So Satan works from the outside, but something inside has to respond.
Precisely. Satan's role is purely external. He tempts, he presents the lie, he stimulates with these external falsehoods. But temptation only finds traction. It only works if the person being tempted already possesses that volatile internal ingredient of selfish desire.
So if I genuinely have zero desire for something, no amount of advertising or temptation from the outside is going to make me act on it. The human has to, in a way, open the door from the inside.
That's a good way to put it. James 1.43 really captures this mechanism perfectly, doesn't it? Each person is tempted when they are dragged away and enticed by their own evil desire, their own internal selfish craving. The internal desire is the fuel, you could say, and Satan's lie is the spark. But without the fuel.
The fire of transgression can't start.
Exactly. No fuel, no fire.
So the source actually breaks down this whole process of the fall to a really clear, almost devastating formula. It shows how both the external deception and the internal liability fit together. Can we lay out that formula for a listener, make it really clear?
We absolutely should. The source details the formula for transgression, and it really clarifies the exact role of the accomplice, of Adam. It goes like this. First, Adam's internal selfish desire, that pre-existing condition, if you will, plus Satan's external lie. The spark, the will to sin.
The decision.
The conscious choice to actually transgress. And then that leads to the actual sin, the action itself, which ultimately leads to death.
So the human absolutely must provide that ingredient of selfish desire for the recipe of sin to be completed. That confirms their role as an accomplice, definitely not just an innocent victim.
Yes. And it clarifies the responsibility. While Satan is entirely responsible for generating the cause, the malicious scheme, the lie itself, the enticement, the human is held responsible for not abandoning their own internal desire. Romans 1.28 touches on this, giving them over because they did not see fit to acknowledge God. Even if the lie is perfectly crafted and totally convincing from the outside.
The individual still makes an internal choice to hold on to the selfish lust that resonates with that lie.
Right. They harbor the desire that responds. This is why the Apostle Paul later has that struggle, right? It is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. That dwelling place is arguably that unaddressed, unyielded, selfish desire.
Okay, that makes humanity's accountability incredibly clear, even within the deception. The lie gets returned to Satan because he originated it. But what about the internal human component? When a truly repentant person returns the lie to Satan, symbolized by the Azazel goat going into the wilderness, what happens to that internal will to sin that was born out of the interaction between the lie and their desire?
Yeah.
Does that just vanish?
No, it's not passive. The individual doesn't just return the external falsehood. According to this understanding, they must also proactively return the will to sin. That internal resolve, that choice to disobey that grew out of their response to the lie, that has to be dealt with too.
Returned as well. How does that work?
Well, this transfer, this return, it encompasses several really critical psychological and spiritual resolutions. It's an active rejection.
Okay, let's define what that involves, returning the will to sin. That sounds like something you do, not just something that happens to you.
Oh, it's intensely proactive. The source suggests it includes the individual developing a genuine hatred for the very possibility of sinning again. You see echoes of this in places like Psalm 139.19. Oh, that you would slay the wicked. O God, O men of blood, depart from me. There's a revulsion there.
And a commitment to change.
Absolutely. It includes the renewed, firm resolve and deliberate commitment not to sin again. The kind of dedication you see in Psalm 119.11, I have stored up your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. This marks a decisive shift.
So the internal will to sin is essentially thrown back at the one who stimulated it in the first place, Satan, is the individual affirming their renewed choice for God, for obedience.
Exactly. They're not just passively asking for forgiveness for the past. They are actively declaring war on the internal mechanism, the selfish desire that made them vulnerable to the lie to begin with.
It's like a spiritual declaration of independence from the principal offender's influence. Okay, so we've addressed the cause, the lie, and the internal mechanism, desire leading to the will to sin. But there's still the consequence of the action itself lingering, isn't there? The penalty hasn't just evaporated.
Not at all. The clock is still ticking on the penalty for the action.
And this is where the last Adam, Christ, absolutely must step in to deal with that death sentence.
Absolutely essential. Returning the lie and renewing the will addresses future conduct. It addresses the spiritual root of temptation, but it does not, cannot erase the past transgression. The legal reality remains stark. The wage of sin is death. Romans 6.23. Adam's sin, the action, can't just disappear into thin air. The penalty must be paid.
And as we established earlier, no ordinary creature, no other human, certainly not Satan, can pay another's price because they're already transgressors themselves.
Correct. Which makes the substitution not just, a nice theological idea, but an absolute necessity for the entire legal framework of justice to actually hold up.
So the last Adam, Christ, he steps in. He dies. He receives the full curse that was due to the first Adam, and he fully satisfies that penalty. Galatians 3.13 talks about him becoming a curse for us.
Precisely. He was the necessary, absolutely unblemished substitute, the only one in all existence capable of fulfilling that role without incurring his own debt in the process.
And central to his qualification, his perfection as that unblemished substitute, is the fact that he was apparently immune to Satan's temptations. We talked about Satan being the father of lies and his mechanism working by coupling the external lie with internal human desire. Why wasn't Christ deceived? How did he resist?
His immunity ties directly back to that formula we discussed. The source material really emphasizes this. Christ had no selfish desire, no, as the original context might put it, no grasping ambition, no personal agenda that could be leveraged.
He only desired the Father's will.
Only the desire to do the Father's will, because that crucial internal ingredient, that selfish desire, was completely absent in him. The formula for transgression simply couldn't be completed. James 1.13 reminds us, God cannot be tempted by evil. The external temptation was definitely there. It was aggressive, especially in the wilderness.
But the necessary internal condition for the sin to take root just wasn't present.
Entirely absent. That perfect, selfless love, that complete lack of internal selfishness, that's a profound distinction. It means he wasn't just sinless in action, but he was truly incapable of falling for the lie through some internal selfish motivation.
Okay. So how does Christ's ultimate sacrifice then address the possibility of sin for us, the redeemed accomplices who do have that struggle with desire? Does it just cover past acts?
It does much more than just forgive past acts. According to this view, his sacrifice works to eradicate the very possibility of sin taking root again in the redeemed. And it does this through the sheer power and presence of the love that was demonstrated on the cross.
How does love eradicate possibility?
When that sacrificial love is truly received, truly embraced, the source suggests that the lust, the selfish desire, which was the necessary precondition for Satan's lie to find fertile ground, is consumed. It's extinguished. Think of 1 Peter 4.1. Whoever has suffered in the body has ceased from sin. Or Colossians 1.20, reconciling all things through the blood of his cross.
So the individual is spiritually reborn, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
having died to that old self, the one that housed the selfish desire.
That's the idea. It's a fundamental transformation. This doesn't just wipe the slate clean of past mistakes. It aims to remove the internal mechanism, the vulnerability that makes them susceptible to the lie in the future.
Wow. Okay, so the atonement works on two levels then. There's the external legal level.
Mm-hmm.
Christ pays the penalty for the action. And then there's the internal spiritual level. His love works to eliminate the root desire, which permanently neutralizes the power of the lie going forward.
That's a good summary.
So the repentant accomplice, the one who is now actively fighting against sin because of this transformation, is saved. They're no longer condemned, along with the principal offender, Satan, provided. And this seems like a crucial condition, provided they don't treat Christ's sacrifice as insignificant, right? Or like a blank check for future bad behavior. Hebrews 10.28 warns about that.
Exactly. And this brings us right to the final, really critical question of accountability. If the price is paid for the action, and the lie is returned, and the desire is being dealt with, how is the final judgment actually determined? What's the deciding factor?
And this is where the source really stresses the essential, visible role of action, of deeds. Han-vi, as it might be termed.
Yes, deeds become paramount.
But wait, the tension faith versus deeds, that's one of the biggest points of debate in theological circles, isn't it? If faith in Christ is what saves us, why do deeds suddenly matter so profoundly in the final assessment, according to the source material?
It matters because, as the source points out, there exists a critical group of people, those who try to use Christ's blood, his sacrifice, as a kind of calculated loophole, a license to keep sinning without facing punishment.
They assume forgiveness means they can just hang on to that will to sin, that internal desire for transgression, without any real eternal consequence.
That's the danger. They misunderstand the nature of the transformation offered. But God, of course, sees beyond the surface profession of faith. He assesses their inner intention, their true will.
The heart.
Precisely. God sees the inner disposition of the heart. 1 Kings 8.39 says, "He alone knows the hearts of all children of men." If the underlying will, the core intention, is not to genuinely fight sin, if the individual secretly harbors and clings to that selfish desire, the source makes it unequivocally clear. The blood of Christ does not cleanse that clinging will.
So if they willingly nurture the desire to transgress, even while claiming faith,
they are, at their core, rejecting the very purpose of the sacrifice, which was meant to eliminate that desire, not enable it.
Okay, that makes sense from God's perspective. He sees the heart, but we can't see the heart. Other humans, angels, even demons, presumably, can't read the inner will. So, for the judgment to be seen as just by the entire created order, there needs to be something visible, right?
That's the cosmic necessity. For the sake of universal justice being seen and acknowledged, creatures must judge and be judged publicly by the visible evidence, the actions, and the spoken words. The fruit, as Matthew 7.16 puts it, or as James 2.18 says, "Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works."
So true. Genuine faith will inevitably show itself through corresponding actions. James 2.21 even uses Abraham as the prime example his faith was shown by his action.
Exactly. Therefore, the source concludes, judgment is ultimately decided by deeds. Hold on, Jane. Not because God needs the deeds to figure out what's in the heart, he already knows that, but because the deeds publicly reveal the heart's actual uncompromised adherence and disposition for all to see. Think Ezekiel 7.8, "I will judge you according to your ways," or Revelation 20.12, "judged according to what they had done."
So the final judgment isn't just a verdict. It's essentially a public, completely transparent display of God's justice. It's necessary not really for God's information, but for the whole universe's understanding and acceptance of his righteousness in both salvation and condemnation.
It is the ultimate transparency. God publicly reveals all words and actions. 2 Corinthians 5.0 says we must all appear to receive what is due for things done in the body. This ensures that the entire creation, every single entity that observed this whole cosmic drama, including the angels, understands and accepts the undeniable justice of his judgment.
You see the irrefutable evidence.
Irrefutable evidence of whether the individual truly returned the lie, truly fought against the will to sin, truly embraced Christ's transforming love, or whether they just tried to game the system while secretly holding on to the root cause of the problem.
And this visible, evidence-based validation of God's justice is also necessary, presumably, for the final definitive judgment of the one who started it all, the principal offender, Satan. What is his ultimate inescapable outcome according to this accountability model?
Well, the source outlines his total and complete defeat. Firstly, his foundational lies about God's law, remember, that it's impossible, it's flawed, it's deadly. Those lies are publicly exposed and proven false.
How? By the redeemed.
By the redeemed, yes, and especially by the martyrs. Their unwavering obedience, even to the point of death, and their subsequent resurrection and transformation, 1 Corinthians 15.54 talks about death being swallowed up in victory. That becomes the ultimate undeniable evidence that the law is good, righteous, and actually achievable through God's empowering love.
So the victorious, transformed, enduring obedience of humanity, fueled by Christ's sacrifice, becomes the final, unassailable piece of legal evidence used against the great liar himself.
Precisely. He's hoisted by his own petard, in a way. Having been legally defeated, exposed as a fraud, Satan is initially confined, cast down, Revelation 12:9 says, thrown into the abyss for a time.
And then the final end.
Then finally, he is cast into the lake of fire. This is presented as him paying the definitive price for all the deaths, all the chaos, all the suffering he ultimately caused. Genesis 9:6, the principle of blood for blood, is sometimes referenced here in relation to him paying the ultimate price for the lives lost due to his deception.
Paying the debt for the murders he instigated.
Yes. And the source emphasizes one final, really powerful, almost graphic detail. The creation itself, which was defiled, dirtied by the shedding of innocent blood resulting from his schemes, is finally cleansed by his blood, his final destruction. It draws on that principle from Numbers 35:33, that blood pollutes the land, and atonement can only be made by the blood of the one who shed it.
So he pays the ultimate public debt, and his defeat cleanses the creation from the damage he inflicted.
A complete and final reckoning.
That is, wow, a truly staggering and comprehensive conclusion to this whole narrative of accountability.
Yeah.
We started this discussion with that historical physical ritual, the Azazel goat, the priest laying on hands, symbolically transferring something, and we've ended up exploring this incredibly profound, multi-layered model of justice where the original lie, the internal intent, the action, the penalty, and the ultimate punishment are all meticulously traced back and applied with perfect precision to their respective sources.
It really does redefine what we mean by responsibility, doesn't it? The system described here demands far more than just paying the penalty for a past action. It demands that the very possibility of that sin arising again, a possibility rooted in both external lies and internal selfish desire, is surgically removed from the repentant individual. It's about transformation, not just transaction.
So if we boil it down, if sin is fundamentally rooted in misunderstanding God, a misunderstanding deliberately fueled by Satan's external falsehoods, then what is the single ultimate act of fidelity, the core requirement for the accomplice for humanity?
Well, based on this whole framework, the ultimate act of fidelity, the thing that prevents transgression at its root, is simply to truly and deeply know God, to understand him as he actually is.
Not the caricature Satan presented.
Exactly, not the restrictive, insecure, arbitrary tyrant Satan lied about, but a being of perfect, self-sacrificing love and absolutely impeccable justice. When you know that God, the entire foundation of Satan's lie, trembles. It has no power.
And obedience becomes natural.
It flows much more effortlessly, you could say, lovingly even. It comes from that place of true knowledge, of restored understanding, not from fear or compulsion.
Okay, that leaves us with a final provocative thought to maybe chew on, something specifically for you, the listener, to consider. Our sources strongly suggest that even if Adam had lived forever in Eden, perfectly obeying every rule, but without the sacrifice of the last Adam, he would have remained perpetually a potential transgressor.
Think about that. Why? Because the possibility of sin, that latent potential rooted in the interaction between Satan's ever-present lies and Adam's own internal capacity for selfish desire, would never have been truly fundamentally eliminated from his nature. He could obey, but the vulnerability would remain.
So forgiveness is one thing, an incredible blessing. But true, lasting, eternal freedom and obedience, the kind this source describes, seem to come not just from an external sacrifice covering past deeds,
But from the internal elimination of the very possibility of sin itself, the removal of that root vulnerability.
So the question for you is, what does it mean for your life right now that the ultimate goal presented here isn't just being forgiven for your past actions, but reaching a state, through Christ's love, where that internal will to sin, that selfish desire that responds to the lie, is utterly consumed, replaced by perfect love? What does that kind of freedom look like?
That's the deep dive.
That is definitely the deep dive. We really hope this exploration has given you a genuinely fresh perspective on the ultimate cost of the lie, and maybe on the incredibly comprehensive nature of divine justice, transformation, and accountability. Thank you, as always, for diving deep with us.